This is to kick off the season for students hoping to enter medical or dental school for fall of 2025. This will be an interactive session with the time split between information and prompts from us, and dedicated time for you to start making notes and reflections on your own experiences and pre-med preparation. During those reflection periods, the OAA team, which is us, will be available to answer some questions, and we may also have time to answer a few more at the end. Tonight will just be the start of this process though, and we'll expect you to continue reflecting and asking questions over the coming months until you apply. Tonight's session will be recorded and should be available on the Open File website by the end of the week. Please feel free to watch again or share it with anyone who wasn't able to be here tonight. Here, you can see our full OAA team and our contact information here on the slide. I am Jalen Cavalier, that handsome fella right in that top right corner. And I'm one of the 6 assistant directors in the OAA. Most of our team is here tonight, with others joining us at next week's information session. All 8 of the OAA advisors, the executive director, associate director, and assistant directors are official health professions advisors registered with the Association of American Medical Colleges, or AAMC. Students who use Rice's open file system as they apply will be working closely with one or more of us during that process. Marcos works with all of our dental applicants as well as with students applying to medical school. This presentation is skewed towards pre-meds because that is such a large proportion of our applicants, and most of the content applies to both groups. But do know that Marcos is an expert on pre-dental and can inform you of any notable differences in the 2 processes. In addition, our office has 2 support staff, a department coordinator, and a health professions coordinator. Sophia will be heavily involved in the administrative parts of Open File, so you will all interact with her via email or phone during the process.
Hi, everybody. I am Nicole Owens. I'm one of the assistant directors. So the purpose of this session tonight is to just reflect on where you are as a candidate overall. You still have more than 6 months before applications open, so that is something that is good for you guys. We can't scientifically predict if you would get into a medical school, but we can help you based on the past, how we've assisted our pre-med population. So as you reflect on your readiness, you may decide that maybe this cycle isn't ready for you. Maybe you're not a strong candidate, and that's okay. We are going to talk about gap years at the end as well, if you believe that maybe you need to decide to do that. In all cases, we hope that the question that you asked tonight will help you identify your strengths that you can highlight in your application, as well that you can try to improve between now and when you apply. So what makes you a strong candidate? This is the pyramid that we use. If everybody would like to download the PDF, you could as well. So this, if you already haven't downloaded your handout, please do so now using the QR code or the link. Right now, you don't need to do anything with it. As time goes on throughout the session tonight, we'll be utilizing it. If you want to take breaks in between to make notes on it, that is what it's used
for. One tip with the form, if you're doing it on your laptop, download it and like open it on your laptop and not just like in Chrome or Google if it opens up like that, because there's text to type out, and it works much better if you like open it in Adobe or something like that.
Okay, and then the last thing that I'll have to say is that acceptance into medical school and dental school is not based on numbers alone. I know a lot of students kind of say, I need a high GPA or I need a high MCAT score. It's really holistically overall that you have set yourself apart for. So that is based on your leadership, your communication skills, your state of residency, if you plan to do most Texas schools, your letter of recommendation, and then the impression that you have on the admissions committee during your interview. So that is important. I'm going to pass it on now.
And I second what Nicole said about a holistic evaluation, but we're actually going to start with probably the most quantifiable factor, which is your academics. So switch it on. I'm sure you're well aware that successful applicants to medical or dental school need to have a strong academic foundation, including grades and test scores. So we're going to look at some specifics. When you submit your transcript to any of the centralized application services, such as AMCAS or TMD-SAS for Texas schools or AAD-SAS for most of the dental schools, they'll calculate several different GPAs based on your grades. Note that there are small distinctions between the ways that the different application services calculate these numbers. So you'll have different ones on different applications. But in all cases, two metrics are particularly important, and those are your science GPA and your cumulative overall GPA. Your science GPA is also called your BCPM GPA because it generally includes the subject areas of biology, chemistry, physics, and math. You may be unsure about whether some of your classes, kind classes, Seymour classes, astronomy classes, those kinds of things, whether they count as BCPM. So we've given you a link to AMCAS's course classification guide there on the handout that you can use to help you sort through your transcript later and try to make the calculations as accurately as you can. We have here some statistics for Rice students who were accepted into med school and matriculated this fall. And you can see here that the average science GPA for those students was 3.74. Please do remember that that means that roughly half of the accepted students were lower than that, okay? You don't need to think that everybody has to be in the average, obviously, but sometimes that's the way our minds work. The 10th percentile was a science GPA of 339, so 10% of our accepted students were below that number, and then the 90th percentile had a science GPA of 3.98. For cumulative GPA, covering all undergrad coursework, you'll see the numbers are somewhat higher. That is the general trend. So that the average cumulative GPA was 383, the 10th percentile at 360, and the 90th percentile still there at 398. Test scores, of course, are another important component. Apologies to our pre-dental students. We have such a much smaller sample size of DAT scores that we don't really have, it's not useful to give you a bunch of averages of how those scores rate. So these are based on our MCAT scores. And so again, here we're looking at Rice's accepted applicants who entered med school this fall. Our average MCAT score of that group was 517, with 10% scoring below 510 and 10% above 523. Do keep in mind though that the national average for accepted students is 512. So try not to focus too narrowly on how you compare to your Rice peers necessarily. Okay, often applicants do get hung up on medians and averages, and these numbers are here not to make you worry or feel like you have to fall in a certain place as much as anything is to try to show you that we have a good spread of applicants across a range on both GPA and MCAT scores. So it's not to make you feel that you have to be at the top of that. Yeah.
For dental students, while we don't have the averages, a 22 AA is probably like the benchmark. So if you're above a 22 AA, and I think all the DATs I've seen are pretty higher than that, you're in pretty good shape. So if you're thinking about your test scores, your DATs, that's kind of the benchmark you're going to be looking at.
Thank you. All right, as you think about your own academic foundation, your metrics are undeniably part of the picture, and you may find it useful to look at AMCAS's nationwide data for students who applied and were accepted to med school. And there's a link again to that grid on the top of the first reflection sheet where you can see how it breaks down by GPA and MCAT combination. There is more to your academic profile than just the numbers, though. It's also important to think about whether you've taken all the courses that are required by the schools you plan to apply to, whether you have a substantial number of science courses on your transcript, ideally taken at Rice for a letter grade. The rigor of your course selection is also taken into account, not just how that numbers crunch out in the end. If you haven't taken the MCAT or DAT yet, or if you're unhappy with the score you received, then you will need to have a plan for when you're going to take it and how you're going to prepare for that and when. And you'll also eventually need to think about how your metrics match up with the schools that you're interested in. So you may prefer to start with the schools and see how you match, or start with your scores and see what schools match those. A useful tool for researching school data is the MSAR, that's the Medical School Admissions Requirements tool. And again, there's a link for that on the reflection sheet. Some of the data on the MSAR is behind a paywall. You can either pay for a subscription for a year, or you can get an access code from the OAA to get access for a week at a time. In just a moment, we're going to give you a little time to think about your own academics. So you'll see that on this first page of the handout, there are statements that reflect these self-assessment questions there. And we're gonna give you a few minutes to consider your answers and think about where you stand on these things. So we understand you probably won't have time right now to do all the calculations and the research and so on, but you're gonna have a few minutes to make a start at that. After you do that, if you feel that academic foundation is an area of comparative weakness for you, don't despair. There are things that you can do to improve your position. So here we've got some suggestions. We're going to do this with each of the sections we talk about tonight. We're going to give you some ways to assess yourself and then some future steps for you to think about. So these are some suggestions you might consider to bolster the academic portion of your candidacy if you feel that that's needed. Okay, now, so for the next few minutes, as I have been alluding to, we're going to ask you to go ahead and read through those statements. Again, if you pull up the document in Adobe or something so that you can, mark the checkboxes and type reasonably without it being one long line in tiny print. Maybe jot down some notes, maybe pull up some websites to explore. If you know there's still some prerequisites you have to take, it's a way to kind of keep track of that kind of thing. And you can also make a note of any of the future steps that you think might be useful for you. During this little pause, there's going to be a few minutes. The OAA advisors are going to be circulating to answer your questions. If you're joining us on Zoom, I think we're going to see if you can submit questions directly to Sophia, and we'll try to answer your questions through chat. So we'll give you a few minutes and then we'll come back to talk about the next line on the pyramid. Okay. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about community service. So we talked about healthcare experience and that there is some overlap with community service, but it is really important to kind of just think about the types of things that you want to do that are innate to you, right? So something that is your passion, that you really want to expound upon, because as we talked about before, when you're doing things to kind of help your application stand out, you want to make sure that you're doing things that are not just box checking. You want to make sure that you're doing some community service projects that are specific and unique to you, that really mean a lot to you, so that you can really speak authentically about those experiences. So it's really important for pre-med and pre-dent students, because it is a way to demonstrate altruism and commitment to helping others. So since you're trying to enter a highly demanding career that is dedicated to serving others, schools want to see evidence that that's truly important to you. So some community service, such as hospital volunteering, again, maybe categorized as healthcare or clinical service experience. But some can perform service in non-medical arenas too, and most of them do. So here are kind of a few examples of some of the things that our students have done, either within Rice, outside of Rice, with the greater Houston area, that are considered community service projects. Once again, we have some questions about kind of assessing yourself and kind of thinking about what it is that you want to kind of put your efforts toward when you're, again, making sure that your resume is kind of well-rounded. So thinking about your community service experiences, sometimes we do ask about leadership. If you're thinking about gaining some leadership experiences, a lot of our students are part of our PAA program, as an example, or student organizations here on campus that can speak to some of their leadership experiences. There's a lot of transferable skills there as well. Also, definitely want to highlight this last question about, some of your service commitments reflect your reasoning for pursuing medicine. So last year during this process, I talked to a lot of students who are like, yes, I want to help people. And so do I, but I am not a doctor, right? I am an academic advisor because I also want to help people. But you have to really think about that question and what that means to you. What does helping people look like for you? Do you want to specifically help older adults? Do you want to help children? If you want to help children, in what ways are you doing those things in your day-to-day life, right? So one of the things that I saw one of my applicants last year doing is that they volunteered at a Houston area high school to tutor science middle schoolers. It may sound like, it's totally off the mark in terms of medicine, but it really does speak to some of those transferable skills that we're talking about. It really is a unique thing that will help their application stand out. And it's something that was personal to them as a person. So they can really speak authentically about that experience and why they want to help students in that way, or help kids in that way, and how that then translates to medicine for them. So when we're talking about assessing yourself, thinking about your passions, demonstrating, how you're tackling challenges that are faced by your community, different things that, again, are specific to you that make you unique as a person. Those are the types of things we're talking about in terms of community service. So take a moment to kind of reflect on what it is that you may have done
Make some notes about your experiences, which ones have been most important to you, which personal traits that you've demonstrated or skills that you've developed through your activities, and kind of look at our AAMC core competencies for entering medical students. It's kind of like a really useful framework for students to kind of read over some of those things, and we do have those in our box folders once you're in the open file process. And really just, again, thinking about the activities that are specific to you. So if you feel like you might need to strengthen your record of community service, we do have some suggestions for you to consider as you make a strategy to do that, right? So again, emphasizing not just box checking, thinking about creative ways that you can help your community, again, either here at Rice or with the greater Houston community. So go ahead and take some time to think about that.
I'll add one little thing. There is a link to the AAFC core competencies on the sheet that you have. So you can actually see them, and the last page of the sheet itself is a list of the competencies with a little elaborate money to them. So you can look at that. These are really good ways to think about how you're going to talk about the non-medical things that you have done and how they're relevant to your preparation for med school. All right, there's a few more minutes to work on that.
Next up, we're gonna start focusing on research. So we don't necessarily consider research to be as fundamental to medical or dental school candidacy as other areas we talked about already, unless you're an MD PhD program, when it's gonna be a more centralized part of your application. However, most Rice applicants do have research experience. They have sometimes found to be very helpful, impactful. Certainly, research can round out your candidacy, especially if you can articulate how it has helped prepare you for a medical career. Research is likely to be more important to a med school that is connected to a prestigious research facility, so your school choice is also a factor. Here are some reminders and guidelines about research. It does not have to be classical wet lab research. Research fields are generally transferable. You can be honed in different environments and fields of study. Also, presentations and publications can be admirable credentials that you may want to highlight, but you don't have to have. So we're going to give you a chance to assess yourself. So here are some questions for you to consider as you assess your research history. You may also want to make notes about how any impactful experiences you've had while doing research. You can also look again at the core competencies list we highlighted before to think about what skills you developed through doing research. If research is an area where you can be stronger, here are some steps. Once you read over those, go ahead and take some time to assess your research experience. Now we're coming up to the top of the pyramid where we start looking at personal attributes and finally how you present yourself through the whole application process. There are several elements that are going into putting this all together, but we're really going to focus on letters of recommendation right now. So letters of recommendation, also called letters of evaluation, they're a way for medical and dental schools to get outside assessments of your suitability and readiness for this next step. If you participate in our open file process, which we'll explain in detail next week, you'll receive a committee letter that serves as an overview of your candidacy. However, you'll still need to solicit individual letters of evaluation for your application. So when requesting letters of evaluation, you usually aim to have 3 or 4. We usually only recommend about 4 at most, unless you're doing an MD PhD, where you're going to need letters from all your PIs. It's important to know this because the more letters you have, the more they'll be read, and there's a chance that some schools may actually have limits, and they might actually not hit all of your letters. So you want to make sure that you're not overwhelming your schools with letters of recommendation part of your application. So keep that in mind. When you're thinking about who to ask for your letters, we usually break it down into the following categories. You're going to want to have at least one from a professor or a science or engineering course, which could possibly overlap with your major. You're going to want to have a professor in your academic major or another academic area. So if you have someone from, say, like your minor or possibly a foreign language or quiz, that'll be okay as well. For some of you, this may be a second STEM professor, and that'll be all right as well. You're also going to want one from a supervising research professor or maybe someone related to your clinical activities, possibly an individual who can provide a strong character reference, perhaps an employer or leader of an extracurricular activity or group. If you are applying to dental school, you will need one from a dentist as well. So you're going to want to incorporate that into your total number. Again, these credit categories may overlap, but you'll want to make sure that you have at least 2 professors. So again, you're going to want to look at those criteria, and at least 2 of those have to be instructors in academic areas. So you're going to want to keep that in mind. Each letter writer should add something to your profile. Don't add a 4th or 5th letter writer just to have someone else say that you're a great student. It's not going to be enough. You want them to be able to go deeper than that, and individual letter writers also don't need to give an overview of all your activities and pre-med preparation. They're really just there to get a good sense of who you are as an individual. So when you're assessing yourself when it comes to letters of recommendation, as you think about who you might, you would want to think about who will write quality letters for you, and here's some questions to consider. As you can see, we emphasize finding letter writers who have observed you close up and can talk about you with specificity. It's more important to have someone who knows you well, who can write an individualized letter than someone who holds a prestigious position or can't say anything of substance about you. So it's definitely one of those situations where it's quality, not just quantity in terms of the big title or name or anything like that. You're really gonna want to know who you are. All right, so for future steps, I do think about the statements on the reflection sheet. You can make some notes about people you might want to ask to write your letters for you. If you don't feel fully satisfied with your potential list, here's some steps that might help you get closer to your goal. You also want to remember the faculty members receive many requests for letters of evaluation, and writing a strong and thoughtful letter takes some time. So we would highly recommend that you ask your letter writers to write you something or ask them by the end of January. Okay? Providing your respective letter writers with adequate and timely notification and appropriate supporting documents is essential. If you are unsure whether someone could be a good choice, you can ask the question you have here. Would you be comfortable writing a strong letter of recommendation? So it may not be enough just to ask, when you write your letter of recommendation, you really want to make sure that they're going to write something strong, something meaningful, something that's going to stand out, not just so-and-so came to class and got a good grade. That's not going to be enough. So that's something you definitely want to think about, or phrase it in that way to see if they will be a strong letter writer for you. With that said, we'll give you some time to again assess the letter of recommendation section, and we'll go from there.
Giving you a lot of information, and I hope a lot of things to think about, but you may be wondering where you go from here. I promise our wish is not to sow doubt and insecurity. Returning to the goals we set at the start of the hour, we hope it's helped you kind of begin to evaluate your candidacy in a realistic way. See areas of strength that you may want to highlight when you apply. Also to give you some strategies to address areas of comparative weakness if you find those. Some of the steps we've suggested are things that you could do between now and May or June when you would apply if you want to apply in the coming cycle. Others may take longer, and that's okay. They may be things you choose to put off your application to continue to work on. I do want to share one more statistic from the latest med school matriculation year, entry year 2023, to help you understand how things have played out recently. So gap years are certainly becoming more and more common. In fact, about half of our applicants from Rice in the latest cycle had taken one or more gap years. And that's a continuation of a long-term trend at Rice and even more so nationwide. Some med schools have reported that as many as 2/3 of their students have taken one or more gap years by the time they matriculate. So you certainly don't need to feel like that the correct path or the best path even is to go straight into med school from college. There's a lot of precedents and good reasons to wait longer if that's the better path for you. It kind of goes back to the fact that if you don't feel like you're at your peak, if when you read through these statements, you think, oh, I don't know that I can really answer what it's here. I haven't done as much as I wanted. Often an easy or a reasonable solution, maybe I don't know how easy, is just to give yourself a little more time, right? And there's a whole lot of these gaps that with more time, you can really make a big difference in your preparation. That doesn't mean that that's necessary or the best choice for everybody, but we want to make sure you know that is a very much an okay choice that may help you in a lot of ways if you're feeling like you need more. Of course, there are also things here again that we talked about that you can do between now and May and go ahead and apply. It's all, it depends on your own situation. But it's basically, if you don't feel like you're at your peak, there's nothing wrong with waiting a cycle or two to get yourself where you want to be. Now, you also don't have to be stellar in every one of these areas. You don't need to think I had to be the highest performer in every level of the pyramid. Everybody's going to have areas that are stronger, and that's okay. You don't have to take every possible future step that we listed in order to be a competitive applicant. But you just want to feel good about your chances. You want to apply when you're at your strongest. So you just need to weigh up how competitive you think you can realistically be in this cycle, and how much you could realistically improve it if you give yourself more time. Obviously, time alone does not make the difference if you use that time productively. So Ultimately, you will assess when you're ready to apply, and we hope that we've given you some tools tonight to help you with that. If you feel that this cycle may be the right time for you, then please come back next week. It's a totally different presentation. It's not this repeated again. It's a detailed review of the open file process, our application assistance program. And we're not in this room, we're 2 doors down, I think, just so you know. So we look forward to seeing you then. We'll be here for a few more minutes if you have questions. Thank you.